In a ceasefire deal between Russia and Ukraine, lasting peace in the Middle East, and favorable new trade deals throughout the world. Those were all lofty goals and promises then candidate Trump made and said it would be achievable, in some cases almost immediately, but now 100 days in have proved to be elusive. Joining me now is Jamil Jaffer. He's the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute. Jamil, thank you so much for joining us. And let's start with Ukraine. That has been so much of a focus of these first few months of Donald Trump. Why do you think that this White House has struggled so much to broker a meaningful agreement between those two countries?
Well, Andrew, look, obviously it's a challenging situation there in Ukraine. The president knew it was going to be hard coming in. He indicated that he would get the deal done even before he took office or within the first few days. Obviously, that hasn't worked out. But look, you've got Ukraine not wanting to give up any of its sovereign territory. They lost some of it in 2014 in Crimea, and now another 20% on their eastern border. Russia taking the view that, look, we've got the advantage here. We should get whatever we want. And of course, the U.S. trying to find a way to get this situation resolved, and then Russia getting more aggressive just in recent days with these attacks on Kyiv hasn't helped.
In another area where there doesn't seem to have been much progress is on China and tariffs more specifically. Do you think President Trump sort of underestimated President Xi's willingness to negotiate?
Look, I mean, this is another really difficult situation. The president imposed tariffs on the entire globe virtually, with the exception, interestingly, of Russia. And then ultimately has taken those off. He's kept 10% tariffs across the board. And then the situation with China, where the president's actually increased tariffs on China to try and get a deal done. But President Xi has held the line. So the question is, who's going to blink first? Unfortunately, it looks like we might blink first. That's a mistake, because ultimately that will redound to our detriment, because if Xi thinks we're manipulable, right, that's going to be a real problem. And so the question is, who goes first, and what does a deal look like? Right now, unfortunately, it looks like we might be first to go.
And, something that wasn't on too many people's radars during the election was our relationship with Canada. And now we saw, even last night with those election results, that Trump's rhetoric is having an impact. How much of a long-term impact or potential damage could that be? Or is that sort of just a flash in the pan, just mostly attributable to Donald Trump's sort of personality?
Well, Andrew, look, I don't think anybody had on their bingo card for the first 100 days of the Trump administration, Panama, Greenland, or Canada, and yet they're all three on our plate. Now, to be fair to President Trump, Greenland has been, for four different times in four different presidencies, we've sought to buy or acquire or somehow get some more access to Greenland. And in fact, in terms of the negotiation strategy, if going after Greenland was a play by the president, he's definitely gotten more agreement from the folks in Greenland and their sort of colonial power, the ability to put more American capabilities in Greenland. So at a minimum, that's been a strong move. And he's got Canada to negotiate. Now, of course, he did push the Canadian population into voting for the Liberal Party the fourth time in a row, that it looked like the Liberals are now taking office after it looked like the Conservatives were on the march and were going to win. So not clear that it worked in terms of Canadian politics. But and then with Panama, we have pushed the Chinese out of a port deal, at least in part there. So some success. We'll see how long that lasts. But look, the playing aggressive has helped the administration. But the problem is you got to be willing, if you're going to do it, to stay the course. And at least on China, it looks like they're not ready to. The president also appears to be giving in on the Iran nuclear deal, and making a deal that looks a lot like the Obama deal. That's not necessarily a good move unless he gets a really great deal out of it. Doesn't look like we're going to get that.
And continuing our journey around the globe here, Israel and Hamas, that of course was a huge issue in the 2024 election, mostly for Democrats who viewed it as a political liability. But during these first couple months, have we seen any progress or any notable differences in policy from what Trump has been doing towards Israel and treating Israel versus what we saw at the end of the Biden administration?
Look, I think by and large, it's been the same policy, which is supporting our allies there in Israel. At the same time, the Biden administration did seem like they sort of had were of two different minds about it. They kept going back and forth. I think in part because of the Democratic electoral base, as you noted, both Vice President Harris and President Biden before her tried to sort of toe the line. President Trump doesn't have that challenge, and so he's been able to throw in very strongly on the side of Israel. to the point of even talking about, saying things like we're going to clear Gaza out, which of course, nobody thought was a good idea, does not appear to be the plan right now, and completely unrealistic. And so, even though President Trump has said sort of things like that, in reality, the large part of the policy has been largely the same, without the hand wringing of the Biden administration.
And just to wrap up here, looking ahead to the next 100 days, what specifically are you looking at? Is there anything that's not necessarily on the radar when it comes to national security, foreign policy that you think could bubble up, or anything that should be a top priority for the Trump administration?
Well, look, obviously the one biggest question mark out there is, will China do something about Taiwan? And if so, when will they go after that? We've seen them play tough on this question of tariffs. They've threatened and have in fact cut off a significant amount of our critical mineral supplies. They could threaten our supply of semiconductors from Taiwan as well. They could make that move. I don't think they're quite ready to do that. But if they do make that move, the question is, what will President Trump do about it? He's largely indicated that he doesn't intend to put military troops in that conflict and on behalf of Taiwan. But if it comes in the context of a larger fight with China over trade and over tariffs and over semiconductors and critical minerals, he may in fact feel the need to have to get aggressive in support of Taiwan. We'll see what happens. But of course, if we lose Taiwan, that could be a huge detriment to U.S. credibility in that region, around the globe, and make it impossible for us to get things that we need, critically to our national security, including that supply of advanced semiconductors. So we'll see how that plays out. That's the biggest flashpoint I'm looking at going forward, not just in the next 6 months, but in the next 2 years while the president is still in office.
All right, Jamil Jaffer, Executive Director of the National Security Institute. Thank you for that whirlwind tour around the globe, breaking down some of the biggest foreign policy challenges for Donald Trump. Appreciate it.